Let me tell you, if you ever find yourself in a sun-baked patch of nowhere, with only the smell of pine sap and the sting of old sweat hanging around, well, don't ever think the universe is done surprising you. Spring, 1869, out on the edge of the Oregon Territory, I was just another lonely lumberman, named Silas Boone, for the curious, standing in a crowd that had come for an auction, but not the kind with livestock or wagon wheels. No, this was darker, sadder, desperate. A makeshift stage nailed together out of crates, men crowding close, hungry and hollow-eyed, waiting for the last lot of the day. A woman with a sack tied over her head, no name, no history, nothing to call her own except for the sound of her breathing. The deputy on stage hollered, "Last one for the day? Says she'll work, says she'll obey. Starting bid, $2. Most men just laughed, spat at the dirt, or walked away. I remember thinking the world must be spinning backward if it costs so little to own another soul's tomorrow. But I guess that's the sort of place it was. And I guess I was the sort of man willing to step out of the shadows and say, $2, my voice carrying just enough to hush the crowd. I wasn't looking for a face, wasn't looking for a fairy tale. I was just a tired man who'd lived too long with the trees, who remembered what it felt like to come home to a cabin that echoed with nothing but your own boots on the boards. "You sure, mister?" the deputy asked, squinting like he thought I might be the crazy one. "I'm not buying a face," I said. "I'm marrying a person." You could have heard a feather hit the floor after that. The lawman scribbled out a marriage contract, handed it to me. I signed, didn't hesitate. Then he turned to her. "Say your name for the record." The sack shifted. Quiet as a church on Monday, I heard Annabelle Crow. And something about her voice, the cadence, the hush, the thread of winter in it, hit me like a shovel to the heart. We left together, silent as ghosts. Nobody tried to stop us. Out in those woods, the trail home twisted tight beneath the pines, the sun too shy to follow. Annabelle never took off that sack, not even when the wind tugged at its edges. She moved careful, wary, but not weak. When we got to my cabin, built tight against the north wind, I told her, "You pick where you stand. No one's going to place you anymore." She crouched in a corner, arms folded tight. I made supper, my old standby, something warm, spicy, simple. Left 2 bowls on the table, out of habit. When she finally spoke, her voice caught me off guard. "What is this?" I shrugged. "Meal for the last one standing. Used to make it for myself after long days. Then started making 2, even when there was nobody else around." I think I heard her almost laugh. Almost. That first night, I remembered. Couldn't help it. 3 years back, the worst winter of my life. I got hurt up near Black Ridge, slipped, busted my leg. Would have died if somebody hadn't found me. Pulled me into a cave, kept the fire going, spooned me bitter pine bark soup. I never saw her face, just a sackcloth and a soft, tired voice telling me, "I'm not going to let you die." She left before dawn, but I found a handkerchief with wildflowers stitched into it. I kept it in my coat ever since. So there we were, Annabelle in my cabin. The same sackcloth, the same gentleness in her hands, the same voice that had once pulled me back from the edge. She didn't know I remembered. I didn't tell her. But some silences don't need filling. The next morning, I watched her walk out into the clearing, arms wrapped around herself, still wearing the sack. She stood at the base of an old pine, loosened the knot, let the sack slip up just enough to catch her breath. It wasn't rebellion. It was a beginning. I told her about the winter I nearly died, about the woman who saved me and vanished. "Your voice," I said, "sounds just like hers." She took off the sack, finally, and I saw the truth, a scar down her cheek, not fresh but deep, like life itself had carved it there. She told me how a man at the boarding house had tried to force her, how she fought, how he fell and died, how the town blamed her, called her a liar, a temptress, a killer. They covered her face and sold her off, debt paid in skin and silence. "I wore this sack so people wouldn't decide what I was worth before I spoke," she said, her eyes fierce but wet. I just nodded. "Thank you for telling me," I said, and meant it. She started leaving the sack off, letting her hair spill free in the morning light. One day, I left a mirror on the table, silver-framed, old but clean, angled to catch the sunrise. Next to it, a sea-green scarf, my late wife's, soft from years of wear. Annabelle ran her fingers along her scar in the mirror, not flinching, just accepting. She wrapped the scarf around her head, not to hide, but to shape how she'd be seen. A new woman stared back at her, still scarred, still standing. But peace never sticks around long out here. One afternoon, a bounty hunter named Cutter rode into town, sharp-eyed, mean, asking after a scarred woman and a lumberman named Boone. He tracked us down to the cabin, polite as a snake waiting to strike. That night, Annabelle and I hatched a plan. She'd ride out with the sack on her head, lure him away. I'd take the mountain pass, meet the sheriff and the ridge patrol. When Cutter made his move, we'd spring the trap. It worked. He never saw it coming. Cuffed, charged, hauled off for unlawful pursuit. Annabelle watched him go, then took off the sack, folded it small. It saved me one last time, not because it hid me, but because I used it. Days turned to weeks. One morning, a knock at the door. Mavis, an old friend from the boarding house, came to set the record straight. She'd seen everything the night that man died, stayed silent out of fear. Now she testified, wrote it all down, signed her name. The sheriff brought a letter weeks later. Charges dropped. Case closed. Annabelle took it down to the tree line, closed her eyes, whispered, "For the first time, I don't have to run." Spring came, soft and steady. I built a small canopy by the cabin, draped linen for a wedding arch. Annabelle sewed her own dress, plain but perfect, and from the old sackcloth we made a veil, washed, mended, stitched with wildflowers. When she stepped outside, the world held its breath. We stood together under that arch. No priest, just us, the trees, a handful of friends. "No matter what covered your face," I said, "you were always the woman I chose." When we kissed, the wind carried off the last of the shame. Mavis smiled. "Never thought I'd see a burlap sack turned into a wedding veil." The blacksmith grinned. "Ain't the sack, it's what she turned it into." That night, Annabelle said, "This thing used to mean everything I feared." I squeezed her hand. "And now," she smiled, "now it means everything I chose." We sat on the porch as the stars came out, the woods finally feeling like home. See, in the Wild West, survival isn't just about holding on. It's about choosing what you hold on to. If this story got to you, share your thoughts down below. What would you have done? What does justice look like when the world tries to silence you? I'd love to hear it. And if you want to hear more tales where scars turn into strength and the past gets reclaimed, stick around for the next Wild West love story. Ride steady, love deep, and remember, even where bullets missed, hearts do not. You ever notice the happiest seasons always show up right after the worst of storms? That first spring after our wedding, the forest seemed to lean in closer, almost like it wanted to see for itself if two wounded souls could actually build something worth calling a home. We were finding our rhythm, mornings of strong coffee and silent gratitude, days split between chopping wood and mending fences, evenings spent listening to the river hum stories only the old pines remembered. I caught myself smiling more, not the old crooked, careful kind, but a smile that belonged to me. Annabelle, well, she was changing too. She sang while she worked, sometimes just a hum, sometimes words I'd never heard before, and every so often she'd catch me looking and toss a pine cone at my head, telling me not to get soft now just because I'd found myself a wife. But peace is a tricky thing out here. It fools you into thinking you've outrun your ghosts. One early summer evening, just as the sun slid low, we heard wagon wheels grinding up the path, unusual, because only trouble ever found us out here without an invite. The horse was lathered, and the driver wore a city coat, out of place in these woods. He was tall, bearded, with the stiff posture of someone who thinks his coin buys him the right to stand a little taller than most. He introduced himself as Walter Finch, an attorney from Portland. Said he'd come with news from the east, and handed me a letter sealed in thick, red wax. I let Annabelle open it, hands steady as a sunrise. She read it in silence, then handed it to me. The words blurred at first, but the meaning cut through. Annabelle's late employer, the one who tried to ruin her, had a brother, Ezekiel Rowe, a man with enough money and malice to burn the world twice over. He'd reopened her case in Missouri, offering fresh bribes and raising old lies, claiming her pardon was a fraud and demanding she be sent back east for true justice. My gut twisted. I looked at Annabelle. She didn't flinch, didn't cower, she just stared back, fire flickering in her eyes. Finch, sensing the storm in the room, offered his services for a fee. I've dealt with men like Ezekiel, he said, but it'll take evidence and signatures, folks willing to stand in the light. Otherwise, they'll drag you back in chains. Annabelle met his gaze. So we find those people. We gather what's needed. We finish this, my way. The next weeks were a blur of letters, horseback rides, and half-whispered meetings at crossroads and trading posts. Mavis, ever loyal, traveled east to fetch witnesses, including an old nurse named Nora who'd treated Annabelle's injuries after that terrible night. Nora arrived one morning, hunched, with silver hair and a memory sharp as a hawk. She brought hospital records, notes scribbled in a ledger, a single ribbon once tied to Annabelle's wrist for identification, evidence the court in Missouri could not ignore. But Ezekiel wasn't playing fair. He sent men to trail us, slick-haired, city-dressed, mean as cornered snakes. One night, our barn caught fire, flames leaping higher than the treetops, turning our modest harvest to ash. Silas, who'd always believed a man could win with his hands and a good heart, now faced the ugly math of money and power. They're trying to scare us off, make us run, he muttered, staring into the smoking ruins. Annabelle laid a hand on his shoulder. We've run enough. We stand. A twist of fate. One of Ezekiel's men got careless, drunk at the saloon, bragging about a letter sent from Portland, proof of Ezekiel's bribes to officials back east. Mavis overheard, stole the letter, and we sent it with the nurse's affidavit to a judge in Oregon City, a man known for not taking kindly to rich men making fools of his court. When the judge read the documents, he issued a stay on all warrants. For the first time, we felt the wind change, but Ezekiel showed up himself, riding in with deputies and a marshal, intent on taking Annabelle by force. It was just before dawn, the sky barely pink. They pounded at our door, shouting threats. Annabelle stood by the window, calm as a pond at dusk, then walked out to the porch with her old sackcloth folded over her arm, proof of every mile she'd survived. You want to judge me? She called out, her voice steady and sure. Then judge me where all can see, with the truth on the table, not behind your money or your men. The neighbors came, drawn by the noise, Mavis, the blacksmith, even the old preacher. They formed a line behind Annabelle, arms folded, faces grim. It was the first time the outpost stood as one, not just for her, but for the kind of justice that didn't bend to a dollar. The judge arrived on horseback, mud still splattered on his boots. He called a hearing right there in the yard. Finch presented the affidavits, the hospital records, the stolen letter. Ezekiel blustered, raged, called Annabelle every name but her own. The judge listened, slow and silent, then banged his gavel. The law's done here, he said. The charges are dropped, for good and all. And Ezekiel Rowe, you're lucky I don't toss you in the river for bribery and perjury. The crowd cheered. Ezekiel left, red-faced and silent, outnumbered for the first time in his life. As the sun broke over the ridge, Annabelle turned to the people who'd stood with her, holding the sackcloth high. This was once my prison, she said, but now it's just cloth. I'm done hiding. The neighbors cheered, some with tears, some with laughter, all with a kind of relief that ran deeper than words. That night, we rebuilt the barn with help from every able hand, laughter echoing through the woods louder than the hammers. And maybe, just maybe, that's how real justice happens, not because some lawman says so, or because the powerful run out of lies, but because ordinary folks finally say, enough. We stand with the truth. So I ask you, where would you have stood if you'd been there that morning? What do you do when justice means risking your peace for someone else's freedom? Leave a comment, share your truth, because stories like this belong to all of us. And if you're hungry for more tales where courage trumps fear, hit that bell and ride with us again, because out here, on the edge of everything, every scar tells a story, and every voice counts.